Okay, so the next thing, well, a couple things. I'll put tables and lists. Basically, just ways to organize our data on the page, right? I think everybody's familiar with tables, right? Where we set up our data in columns and rows so that everything lays out nicely and we can glance and we don't have to write long, complicated sentences. We can just put the data directly in a table and people can find what they want. Just organization things a little bit, making it look nice. Usually well labeled, some sort of formatting to make it stand out on the page so that it catches people's eyes and they jump right to the table and dig the data out directly themselves. So I guess the first thing here is periodically on different reference material, you might see warnings about tables with HTML. And sometimes they're not very clear. So to clarify what those warnings are, if you come across them, don't use a table for your entire layout. So the early days of HTML, way before CSS, somewhat before we even had a lot of the attributes that have now been deprecated. We don't even have any more to style stuff. Basically, all we had to work with for layouts was the div tag. And a lot of people found it most convenient to just set up a table. Right? So your entire HTML tag, instead of using the div tag, people would just set it all up as a table. It's like this would be one row of the table, different rows of the table. And if we wanted to split the page up this way, which, well, I think that most of your homework's been like this. Nowadays, we probably use a header tag and a footer tag, a section tag, maybe an article, like article, a section, and a main. Use different HTML semantic tags. But it got a little bit confusing when we only had one type of container tag to work with. So people would just set it up as tables. So like this would be one row of a table, and we just say span 5 columns, maybe. Span 5 columns. Then our big section here, the main content, would all be set up as part of a table, and we just set it up to span 5 columns or 3 rows, however big it needed to be, and make modifications to a table to lay out the entire HTML thing. And that's what those warnings are about. Because we don't do that anymore. That was kind of frowned upon, even when it was in very common usage. So when you see those warnings about not using tables, that just means don't use a table for your entire page layout. Or another way to put it is use tables for table things, right? If you have a bunch of just raw data, names and addresses, and phone numbers or something that would go nicely in a table, like you would normally see data put into a table. Dates and sales figures, things that go in a table, use a table for table stuff. Just don't use the entire thing. Don't use it for your entire page layout. The biggest problem is search engines will not look at the data in a table. So if you lay out your entire page as a table, the search engine won't pay attention to any of the content on that table, on that page. Yeah, so there are times we do have stuff that fits nicely in a table, right? Bunch of contact information. We have somebody's name, their email, their phone number, their address and all the different ways to contact them, and there's like 50 different people, that's just going to lay out nicely in the table. Or that other one I just said, a bunch of dates and sales figures. We don't want to clutter those up in a big sentence, so it's stuff we would put in a table. And really, we have two options for this. The traditional table elements, and a newer one that I don't think our book covers. It's been a minute since I wrote these notes, but I don't think our book covers it, where we can use CSS to say that some of our other HTML semantic tags need to be organized as a table. So let's look at those real quick. First off, the traditional tables. Obviously, there's a tag called table, and an attribute we always want to consider with this is the border attribute. And this is how many pixels wide is the border between things. So border like 5, and then all the cells on the table will have that border between them. And then in between, for the in between that opening and closing table tag, we set up table rows. Do I have a color here? So TR is the row of a table. And we're probably going to have several rows, but what I'm writing on the board, I'll just do one. And then inside of that table row, we have table data tags. So TD is table data. That is one cell in the table. And a couple more that we'll look at for styling it, but let's get started with those. Just kind of some basic table information. So I'm going to share my screen. And during the break, I went ahead and closed everything that was open there. So I'll start a new file for this example. So HTML file. All that same starting stuff we see every time. The body. I'll just save this up here. I'll call it tables.html. So to make a table initially, we have to create a table tag. And I'll leave the borders off for now, and we'll come back and put the border on. If we don't put the border attribute in there, it's like saying border equals 0, which I usually like to manually type myself just for consistency. Because even if it's the default value, I want to make sure when I look at the code looking for problems or something, I see that they are turned off there. But if you put the border to 0, which is the default, there's no borders between cells. And if you put it to any other number, that specifies how many pixels go between the cells. So inside of the table, our two main things are the table row tags. So we'll have a row in the table, and then each row will have some table data. I'll do something like this: name/TV, then name, age, town. So I'm gonna start off with just sort of a header row on the table. I'll add another row down here, and put some information in the same way. So TR specifies that we have a row of a table. So for every row of the table, we have to put another TR tag, and then we fill that up with the cells for the row, the columns. So each TD, the table data, is the next column in the row. So I'll just put my name in to start with. TD, how old am I? And I live in Clarksville. Oops, that's not how to spell that. And again, opening and closing tags on everything. Most of that should look familiar. I'll go ahead and open this one. You see, it kind of hard to tell that it's table-like, right? It tried to not add in any extra space. Let me add something that might spread this out a little bit differently. So I added another row. Whoops. And for the data, I'll do a short name. Short age. It's age, so I was kind of limited to 1 or 2 digits, I guess. And I'll abbreviate it.
Hey, Chris, by default, does it automatically put the space? Because I'm looking at the code and I don't see, I was trying to see where that space was.
This space here?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because it lines it up. So I was setting up
it's for a table.
The small stuff here. Yeah, because it's for a table. Notice how everything's lined up.
Okay, so if you were to double click on Chris, that would be its own cell.
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to turn the borders on here in just a minute, and notice how it tried to make it fit. So like here, there's more space in order to line those up.
Sorry, or here, I walked away and came back, and now we're
looks like name is the longest thing in this column. So that defined where the edge of that was. Kind of hard to tell here, but it would have fit this longest word here, this Clarksville, into that column. So if I come over here and turn the borders on, we'll be able to see that a little bit better. So set border equal to some number. That's how many pixels wide it is. And with the borders on, we can see the space. The space makes a little more sense, right, Tiff?
Yes, I love that. I love how it looks. Now, how could you go in there and do the wrap text and all that?
We just set it up with style sheets. You have to define how big it is.
Do you have to use the pound wrapper for that?
No, that's just an ID.
Okay, that's a div ID.
Yeah, that's just an ID for a div, so we can tell that particular thing apart. Do you mean like wrap text?
Yeah. So if you had, I mean, Clarksville is just one word, but if I wanted it to, if it was going over and spilling over, where I could have it in one cell, 2 lines.
Yeah. So it'll try to make it fit. So here, it stretched everything out so that longest word could fit. If in the style sheet we defined it to only be this wide, where it's too short for New Albany, it would try to wrap that. It does text wrapping at a word break. So any of that, we can set up the sizes on these. So just like we did with, well, like we've seen with style sheets over and over again. I'll go ahead and create a style sheet. Equals table.css. I'll just call it table.css.
Thank you.
And then we can set up, well, we can call it the same ones. We can set some properties for the overall table. set stuff for the table row, or set stuff for the table data itself. Tables.css. And to make that wrap, I guess we could, if we set the width of all the table data stuff to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Then it would wrap at the page break, like you said.
Yeah, maybe 9 EM. Let me try this. Nope, it did not like that. Min width, oops, did I not link that correctly? Oh, tables. So now they all have that same minimum width available, but if we made them all exactly that width, well, this one, it couldn't wrap it, so it had to force it wider.
And then what happens if you put a max width on there and then the max width is shorter than the width of it? Would that make it wrap too?
I don't think it would. Well, that just, it doesn't allow it to be that way, so it just overflows.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, it wrapped it and overflowed. So if it can wrap it, like New Albany's 2 words,
Right.
it's able to wrap the text.
Big enough for Albany, so
yeah,
the only thing we'll be able to do there is change the font size, and that's not going to work. So.
Yeah, in Clarksville, it couldn't change that, so it couldn't wrap it or anything, so it just had to overflow. So we do still have all of those controls. And like normal, you'll just want to kind of mess around with some of that, kind of see what happens. Notice there's a border on by default. So remember we have this border attribute on the table? So like red, 8 pixels.
Would we be able to include a conditions where if it is, if you're doing a whole bunch of code and you don't see somewhere where the word was longer than the cell, that it would turn red?
That is much more complicated. You'd have to do that with scripts. So that's not with what we're looking at in this class. But you could do that in JavaScript fairly easily. That'd be like a validation thing. Notice that it had those default borders on there, and whenever I changed the CSS border, it affected all of them. But there's still a little bit of space between. And it didn't really make it any bigger. Or, well, make it really big. The outside one was able to get bigger, but those borders in between kind of stayed the same. Just some stuff to, I guess, kind of play around with it. Keep in mind that there are some borders by default, and when you start styling it, you will change those. And if we need some of them to span a couple columns, that's an attribute we can put in. So I'll use like these 2. I'll take out the number here and just have New Albany spread across a couple columns. We have this attribute call span, and then just how many columns do we want it to span across? So that we can kind of mix and match them that way. Or if I take out the name here, we have a similar thing with a row span. So we can make those cells bigger to the extent that it is a table. So we can only, if we make it bigger, it has to fill in the next row or the next column, and we're restricted to those sizes. Well, there was something in the chat room, but it's doing the not pop up thing again. Okay. And it gives us a really nice way to organize our data. What else do I have on the notes? Yeah, so we have to have these tags. These are the ones we have to have. We have to say it's a table. We have to define table rows and cells inside of the table, each row. And that's kind of the minimum to set up a table. But there are some other things that we might want to put in there. In total, there are either 5 or 6 things. So there's 5 tags about the table. Well, I'll list these out on the board. So it's this list. So we have the tables, table row, and table data. We have to have those. But we also have tags for T head, the table header, obviously to make the header look stand out, the table body, and table footer, which would really be like organization things, right? Just ways to kind of specify what part of the table we're looking at.
What about in the header, if we wanted to have one of those little sandwich menus, could we look at how to do that? You know what I mean? Where it's got the 3 lines. Is that, or would that be a table that we use?
That would be probably fall into form elements, because that's a type of button.
Okay.
That's what we're going to look at Wednesday.
Okay.
And again, you would need scripting to make it do anything. So there's, you'd probably have to have a couple languages to make that, kind of make that happen.
Lord.
Yeah, in this class, we're just looking at doing stuff for them. So really, there's 5 different things we have. There's a 6th one I'll talk about in a second. And we would use those to define different parts. Something in the chat room. The buttons keep moving on me. So I'm going to take out those column span and row spans. I'll take out the column span here and just make this I'll put a date down here and span the whole table. So just change that up a little. So now there's clearly a header section that has the labels for the columns, this data, and then down at the bottom, just saying when that's from. And we could define those with those other tags. So we could put in like a T head. In the header, the table body, which just has 1 row right now. And then the T footer. Or is it foot? T foot. There's no ER on that. Yeah, I wrote ER on the board. It is just T foot. Kind of matches the T head part. And then in the T foot. So I reload that, and see, it still looks the same. That's more just an organization thing. So then in our CSS, we would probably use Descendant Selectors to select that. So instead of just styling by the table row, we would do something like the table head table row. And I don't know, for Table header seems like a background color would be a a standard change. Make that lime colored with some random color. And then that only affects the row in that section.
That is so cool.
T-foot, again, the table row, we could add some color to make the table look a little bit nicer. And yeah, then little things like that, you'd style up your table so that it catches people's eye. If they go to your webpage, they can go right to the table of data and pull the data off themselves without having to read through long descriptive sentences.
If you put in open and close center tag before and after town, would it center it?
Where at?
On the HTML code where town is, and then where I guess it would probably be in, I would probably put it before the TD.
Oh, to like center all the text? We'd probably want to do that in the style sheet.
Okay, so I'm, instead of doing it individually, so if you have to make a big change to the whole style sheet.
Center. Because then that would affect that whole row. Although those are the widest thing in each column. So if we went back and made each one wider, 75 pixels, that's probably wider. Then it centers that one. Maybe move this to the right. Text align right. So usually most of your style stuff you want to do in the CSS. So keep that in mind. If anytime there's a style rule like that, try to do it in the CSS.
Okay. Can you go back to your HTML code so I can see why there's only one column on the bottom row?
Oh, I did. Okay. Column span. So there's call span and row span.
Okay, and then why is the one on the very bottom? It looks like one, like it's one cell. Is that one cell?
Yeah, because it's spanning across. It's spanning across 3 columns. That's this right here.
Oh, okay, so I see T-foot. Okay, that's the footer part. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so in the footer, the table row, there's in this cell, span that cell across 3 columns. And then we have all the style things like we've seen, and we can keep adding rows and duplicating things. I'm just going to copy this data and just make it look like more of a table. Whoops.
If you made it span across 2 columns, is it going to go to the right or to the left?
It depends on that situation. Let me take out that stuff I just copied in. So if I change that to 2, there's actually kind of a problem because our table has 3 columns. So it doesn't line up with the whole table.
Right, but like say for instance, if I was doing budgeting and I wanted that bottom right column to be like a total or something else where those 2 columns really wouldn't have any direct relationship with that one cell.
You could set a table data to be nothing.
Yeah, you'd have to have
null?
And then do a call span. Yeah.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah, an empty one. Is that way? Otherwise, it'll be what's called a jagged table. They won't all line up, which is what happened here. If I paste a couple more rows in, notice it all put it in one row. So we do have to remember to put the end a row and start a new row each time. Where's the next one at? Here, paste that, and paste that. So we do have to be very explicit when we spell it out. We can see if we just have raw data, it's presented much better in a table form. You just want to be careful and don't use a table for your layout. We used to do that. It was kind of frowned on. And the big issue anymore is search engines will not read what's in the table. The search engine will simply note that there is a table on the page. It won't look at what it is. So if your entire page is one giant table and there's nothing else, the search engine won't have.
It's just data, not information to the computer.
Yeah, it won't trigger on anything. It won't read a table. So that's the 5 tags we have for traditional tables. One other kind of a 6th one that we might want to include is there's no label, right? There's nothing telling us what that table is. And that's a caption tag. So caption, I'll just put personal data. And the thing to note about the caption tag is it goes inside of our table element. So it's inside the table element, but it shows outside of it, like a label, where a label should be put at. It's fairly straightforward. You'll want to mess around with it some when we get to lab time. The book has a number of examples of those. 5 to 7 years ago, I did a lot of those tables. Anymore, I kind of prefer an alternative way to make a table, which is using regular CSS. And we can just use the display property. One of our options on the display property is as a table. So I'll make a section here, and I'll give it a class name table. Oops. And inside of that, I don't want to use div. I'll use article tag. I'll use an article. Probably need another class tag. Class equals. Yeah, that'll work.
What does article mean again?
It's just an arbitrary name for tags. It's the same as a div tag, just like a section tag or a main tag, or it's just another name that might be used, that will probably be useful, or a nav tag. So it's just really just a div tag with a special name on it.
So what do you generally put in that? Because I know it would stand out to me if I use it. I'd say, oh, well, I know that's in here. What would you generally use? You use it for tables?
It varies. I usually use sections and articles for kind of interchangeably. Just switch back and forth. That's kind of the go-to for the main content on the page.
I think the big thing is use different ones if they're going to be looked at differently by in the style sheet. Because if you say, oh, I'll put another section tag in here, but you've already defined sections somewhere else in the style sheet, unless you give it a class or an ID or something. Well, why does that look weird? Oh, because all my articles, because I did that with something with the homework something, and I said, oh crap, I got to come up with something else to call that.
So Joe, would you put a div ID within the article?
Well, yeah, div is just another way of segmenting. I mean, article and section and div are just ways of segmenting what's in the HTML But the thing is if you define that in the CSS,
Mhm.
then unless you give them classes or IDs, whatever you define it as will go to all the ones you called that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like
Yeah,
I say, deal with div. If you wanted all your divs to look
Okay.
a certain way, you call them all divs. If you wanted
Yeah, before
articles, you call them all articles.
HTML5, this would have looked like this. Div, div,
Okay.
div,
And then how would that look in the style sheet? Just everything would be
every,
whatever
all
the
divs.
codes are, like he said. Yeah, like, and
Well,
you have,
no, you'd give them IDs or classes depending on what it's a singular thing, a bunch of them.
The style sheet is part of HTML5. So useful names, like calling it section instead of just calling everything div, and calling this article. That and CSS, those are all HTML5.
So we didn't have CSS in HTML4?
It wasn't part of the standard.
Oh.
It's existed for a while, but it wasn't the standard until HTML5. So you couldn't necessarily count on all the browsers knowing what to do with CSS.
So it's a good thing I took this class now rather than a few years ago.
so you can kind of look at it as like they're different links.
In HTML4, we had to do it all with attributes because that's the only one we knew would work. And not just that, they weren't standardized. So we'd have to put in some attributes to style it for Internet Explorer and different attributes to style it for Google Chrome. It was a little frustrating and complicated. And all of them were div tags. So it seemed more like coding. There was less useful words and they all blended together. So basically, inside of each article, I started typing up, I put a span tag holding the same information as this. So instead of a paragraph, I just put spans. I guess I could have done it with a paragraph, but uh, 42. So a whole bunch of typing, but the same information. Which, if I just run that, it put the same information, but we can see it's not lined up now, right? When there wasn't any styling information on the table, it still lined up those columns. Tiv asked about the space there. So it knew it was a table. But here are just some arbitrary tags that I threw in here. And I put the same information as the table. I'd like that stuff to be in a table. And one of the big reasons I like this is we don't really see it in this stripped down example, but on a big website with lots of pages, there's probably section tags used elsewhere, right? And article tags and spans. And these tags would have some rules in the style sheet already. Some basic rules about it. Which that might be a better answer to your question, Tiv. Like when we use one and the or the other.
That's what I meant. Like at what
maybe you set all the section tags to be green and all the articles to be blue.
And
then you just use the one that you want.
You did the background colors on that, and when I saw that really is making a key, because it seems like to me like we're programming our program. I mean, ways to identify it. The tags are just identifiers. This is a type. So when you get into scripting, not so much in web scripting, but I guess more like full-out programming. If you were writing things in, say, Java or C#, you would see angle brackets show up again, and essentially used the same way, because what we do, angle brackets are used to define the type of thing we have. So this section tag, what this section tag means is we have a type of thing that we're going to define
as a section. And then we'll write up some rules for what the computer is supposed to do when it sees a section, when it has a section type of thing. That's all the
So
names
I'm
are.
looking at that
kind of
section
arbitrary.
as a possible page, like a major site link. So let's just say that section would be flowers. So then looking at it going down, I can just see where it is. You see what I mean? Where I can see where we're actually creating the programs from this. I mean,
yeah, it's they're just words to help identify our stuff. And we used to only have one, so it wasn't very we couldn't identify things very well when they all had the same name. That's why in HTML we have all these useful names. And then we can style them differently so that there are some overriding style rules, even if we put classes and IDs to define style for a particular one. We use the tag to list out the stuff they have in common, if that makes sense. But this, getting back to this, have the same information as above, but it doesn't look at all like a table. It just squeezed it in there as much as it could. And to do that, we use the display property. So over in the CSS, I have a bunch of white space. So I use those class names. And the reason I like this is on a big site, we would probably have lots of things called sections. So we might already have a bunch of style rules set up for a section tag that matches everything on our site. And then on this particular one, whoops, I gave it the class name table. So we can single that one out and just add an extra rule in to say display that as a table, which isn't quite enough because it says, okay, so that's going to be a table, but it doesn't know what to do with the stuff inside it. That's why I put classes in all this other stuff. There's these things for a row, and then the span tags and the articles are going to be like the table cells. And we just set the display property right for those as well. So like the thing called row, display is going to be set to table dash row. And do I have anything else in my notes about this? Nope. Okay. And then the span tags inside of that row, we can set those as table cell, I think. Yes, table dash cell. And now you can see it lined up a little bit better. Not a whole lot because it didn't try it. There's no space in between anything, right? But we can see there's a space here between 42 and Clarksville because age is longer than 42, or a slight space here. We can we'd have to use paddings and margin. I'll do it with padding. 6 pixels padding on every side probably work. There we go. Spread it out a little, and we can see that stuff lines up nicely like a table, right? And then add some borders to try to make it look like that outside one, or that top one. I couldn't think of the word for a second there. I guess I've been talking for too many hours straight today. So like a border, that looks like an outset border, so maybe 5 pixels outset, and some sort of gray in the middle. I'll do 76. Oops. I'll just pick some random gray and see what that looks like.
Chris, this might be a really weird question, but is this what the user sees, or is this just information that the program is going to be pulling data from these tables.
This is what the user sees.
This is okay.
Like what we're looking at over here on the right side of my screen. That's what
Yes.
these instructions say to do. So that's what the style sheet is doing. The style sheet is just the instructions on how to make it look. So HTML is the instructions of what text, of what shows on the page, and what type of thing everything on the page is. And the CSS is how it looks.
I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes I feel like I have it. And then sometimes I'm just like, I don't know if it's because I don't get enough, rest between it and like really pause. But I'm just like, sometimes I'm never going to get this. And then sometimes like, oh, that makes sense. And I'm like, huh? A lot.
We've seen quite a bit of it. It takes practice. It takes quite a bit of practice, and the class goes quick. It's been a lot of information in 8 weeks, right? We've talked for several hours twice a week this is the 5th week now. So we're 2 hours into the 5th week. So this is like, 8, 10, we're up to about, 4 times 16. We're up to 18 hours of talking about this. We've covered a lot of information. And it takes a little while to practice it and get used to it and get comfortable with how it goes together. But this is kind of an alternative way to set up a table. We could set these cells up the same way, kind of set background borders, and I'll just put a border around these. So like the border on each cell of, I don't know, maybe 1 pixel.
I may be jumping a little too far, but how would you put a selector in that table? Like, let's just say if you wanted to do a schedule, or like how we have these quizzes when you get them. I see that those tables, there's like selectors for us to pick the answer, where then that whatever they select would null. And I mean, I'm not asking that part, I'll find, but we're going to pull that out of the schedule as being an option to book.
So like putting links in the table?
I guess maybe. Like if I wanted to say
that's
that these
forms,
are the
isn't
times. Forms?
I'm guessing that's forms.
Let me check something real quick.
You know what I mean, Joe? Where
the table just has words and numbers in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really
that information would have to be in its own database.
Yeah, we can put a link to it.
Okay.
Right,
Joe. I have to have a separate database where
like here in Huntsville, I could put
kind of calculate it. I don't
I'll
know
put
if
it
it
in
was
the
this
top one.
class or other one where we were talking about. I think it was our database class. We were talking about different programs that use like real time, where we were talking about like the hospital or the VA, where if you scheduled something, or if you were in someone's record, no one else could do it at the same time. I guess I needed to do one of those.
Oh, okay. So
that's next 8 weeks, isn't it?
So that's not necessarily a table. So yeah, pretty much all we could do is like what I did here. I just put a link on that table.
Mm-hmm.
So a link on the word for the table. This is just showing stuff. We haven't got to interactive stuff yet. So if it's coming from a database, it's set in the database. It doesn't necessarily, we change it in the database, but we would need something else to control the database. And then the table just displays what's held in that database.
Okay.
That makes sense, Tiff?
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So, and we'd be able to see how we can link that, whatever that information that it's pulling from the database to the table. So if a slot wasn't available, like for my daughter, she's going to be offering music lessons. So if she's available, like you for tutoring, you're available. With
Okay, yeah. So that you would do from the database. I see what you're asking now. That you would do from a database, and you would have to control the database. You would need some way to control the database, which would probably be done with PHP.
Okay, I think that's the one I've got next semester. So we probably won't really have the scheduling. I might say just in for this website, or at this point, I'll probably just say these are the times that were available, and then when we get into our next semester, then we'll get into that.
Yeah. So right here is one that does that. So this is the most stripped down version. I don't know if I have any. I think I deleted all the databases I have locally, but it would enter the queries, and then it prints out the table down here. But you can see to do that, there's some HTML code. There should probably be some CSS code. There's no styling. That's just the most stripped down version. This is one I threw together to quickly send to somebody. 2 PHP scripts, a SQL script, and a JavaScript file. So it takes a minimum of 3 languages just to get the black letters on a white word there. It looks something more like this. So we'd have to have all this stuff that reads from the database and sends it back, sends instructions to and from the database. So that's in the future, Div. For this right now, we're just putting words there. What we'll see on Wednesday is forms, and that's where we have controls like text boxes we can type into, and buttons we can click, and color pickers so we can choose a color. And
yeah, but for now, and that's what Joe was just talking about, but for now, I'd probably just use those forms for them to click here to contact, to reach out if you want someone to contact you, until I can learn, in, like you said, much later on how to do that.
Right now we're just putting the forms together because the next 2 classes, the JavaScript class, a client-side scripting and server-side scripting, will do. There's enough. It's going to be overwhelming enough just doing stuff with that. We need to know how to put the forms together before we get in there, and put the results together. Right? We put the form to enter all that information, and then usually spit it back out on a table. And then messing with the database side is a little complicated, so we want to make sure we know how to get information from the user and display it when it comes back before we work on the scripts. So this class, pretty much just covers how it looks here. Words on the page. If you have me for the second
I quit texts before I get my certificate, but I'm not gonna quit.
Okay. It does get frustrating. Programming does, at times it does get frustrating because we'll think the computers won't do what we think they should. It's like, I know we'll be very, very confident that our algorithm is correct, and the computer will just be doing something completely different. I got a little sidetracked there. Does that make sense as far as displaying the data on the page? And
yes,
if you were asking about forms, that's what we're going to look at Wednesday.
And we would use text align and some other stuff in the in the CSS to make that all party.
Yes.
Sort of just like we did with the. It's just like we did with the other way of doing it. It's just applying it to different tags.
Yes. So there's one big drawback to doing it this way, using the CSS one, and that is we don't have a column span or a row span attribute. Our cells have to be in, so we can't do jagged columns. We can't do jagged tables. If we have 3 columns, every row of that table has to have 3 columns. Or if there's 5 rows in one column, every column has to have 5 rows. So we can't do column spans if we do it with CSS. But usually we don't do that with a whole lot with tables anyway.
I'll save you looking at the thing. Tiv would like to do a breakout room for lab time next time.
Okay. Yeah, there's some stuff we'll see on Wednesday. I have some stuff planned. Yeah, so we can't do column spans. We have to do a square table, and it just takes a little bit. We could add in, like wider containers positioned in the right spots and things to spread out, like for a header row, and make little adjustments. But mostly it's just we get a really nice square area this way. Yeah. And the biggest advantage of it is if we do a CSS table, a search engine will read the data in that table. So if there's data that pertains to something somebody's searching for, and you have it in a table form, if you put it in a CSS table, a search engine can find that. Okay. Which will be important with search engine optimization. Something we will see next week, I think. It's coming up soon. I pulled the notes out already, but I don't think we'll get there Wednesday. But yeah, just 2 different alternatives to set up tables, and one's entirely in CSS and the other one's mostly HTML. And then we just have that normal identification thing that we do in the CSS to make it look nice. The book has a lot of the examples of the earlier one, but these are the main 3 that you need. Display some wrapper container as a table. And then inside of that table, you'll set up some stuff to be table rows on the display property. And inside of the table rows, you'll set up something with a display property of table cell to take the place of those 2 required ones, the TR and TD tags from the traditional version. Let's see, what else did I have on here? List. And this will go shortly because our textbook really, really loves lists for some reason. They seem to want to use a list for everything. I'm going to go ahead and erase this table stuff. That's okay. Nobody seems to be stopping me. So tables are one really nice way to organize things. Did I run out of chalk? We've got some small pieces. There's a piece. But another good way to organize things that might not fit in tabular form is going to be a list. And there's basically 4 kinds. There's the ordered list. Which is the numbered or lettered ones. If things that we would have in order to, so like 1, 2, 3, 4 items in a list, or A, B, C, D, something that applies order to it. Or an unordered list, which is just a bulleted list. We can change the different bullets or put a picture in there. A dictionary list the book used all those because the author really, really likes lists. And I usually include a detailed summary here as well. I always think of that as a type of list. I guess it's a little bit different. That's the main one I wanted to look at here. Yeah, so unordered list and ordered list, you've seen those in the homework quite a bit already. Our textbook really likes those. Those only take in list items. So when we go to put something in there, I guess I could write the tag. We can only put an LI tag inside of the OL or UL tag. And list items include a line break. Because list, when we make lists, we usually put each thing on its own line. So like a paragraph tag, a list item tag does include a line break.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I was trying to take notes. You said you can only put UL inside of the OL, is that what you said?
The other way.
Okay.
OL or UL, those are our types of lists. We say whether
you can only put LI inside of those.
Do we want to like a numbered list or a bulleted list? And we can change those up. We can choose what type of thing it is, choose whether we use numbers or letters. Or for the bulleted list, we can put images if we wanted to. There's different things. So I have that on the notes here. Oh yeah, I do have it on the notes here. And for a dictionary list, we put in two things. I'll put it the other way. First off, the DT, which is the title. So dictionary title, which is DT tag, and then the dictionary definition. Or DD. So it usually looks like, is intended to look like a dictionary, right? If we open a dictionary and look up a word, the word we're looking up and perhaps the phonetic pronunciation of it is going to be formatted different than the definition. That way we can single out the parts of it individually. And that's what's intended to be used for a dictionary list. And a detailed summary list is one that the collapsible list, where we have the information and then a little triangle we can click on to hide or show the information. Let's look at a couple examples of these really quickly. But you all have seen a bunch of lists already, so I'll just kind of.
The one with the drop down arrows called a retractable list.
A detail and summary. We will see that here in just a second. That's the main one I wanted to look at here. I've always counted it as a type of list. I think our textbook probably calls it something other than a list, but so list, I'm going to make a new file called list.html just to throw a couple of these on here, but we've seen, y'all have seen quite a few of them. So just normal start 10 HTML page, right? What sort of things, what type of stuff do we have, right? We have some HTML stuff. There's some head stuff. We'll link to a style sheet in a moment. Then there's body type of stuff, which is what shows on what we want to show on the page. So to start with, I'll do an unordered list. We've seen these before, right? Then we can put in some list items. I'm just making up some words here. I'll put like thing and stuff. Junk. That's words for a list. So by default, if we just say we have an unordered list, it gives us this nice little bulleted list. Little dots to identify each thing. They're indented. It's kind of hard to tell there. And what I've always done for a title is right next to UL, I'll put something, some words here. I don't know, my list. So that we have some sort of title to what that list is going to be. It doesn't hurt to maybe put it in a paragraph tag to help it stand out, or a span tag. But yeah, I usually just, personally, if I want a title on the list, I'll just kind of put it there next to the list before any of the bulleted points start coming in. But here, just kind of a basic list, and by default, we have the little circles, so we can change that in the CSS. I'm going to link to a style sheet. I guess I'll call it lists.css. Call it the same thing as this HTML so we can find it. And create a new one. And so far, the only thing we have is unordered list. That is list.css. And then we have a lot of the style things that we would normally use. So, well, at this point, we have the unordered list and the list items. So for the unordered list, one of the properties we might want to address is list style type. And this tells us the shape we're using, basically. So, well, like we've seen, circles the default. Or circles are hollow, and disk. I can't remember if there's an S on the end. Oh, no S. So disk is filled in. We also have square. And yeah, there's a couple, I believe our textbook in the appendix in the back has the full list of all the options, but list style type kind of spells out that little, what shape we're going to use. We can also use an image if we wanted to. Before I do an image, I'll do one other thing here. Now I'll go ahead and go to the image. So instead of a list style type, we have a list style image, and then we just need some sort of image to refer to. I don't know if I have any little images on the computer handy. I'm just going to draw something really quick. I'm going to Microsoft Paint. And, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a little green arrow on here. Some sort of fill pattern. So just a little arrow image. Any arbitrary image, that just seemed, that was a pre-built shape, so it seemed like it would be really, really quick to, something really quick to do. If you have some other images you might want to use, so I'll call that arrow.ping. And then for list style image, we can just ask for that image. The same way we would ask for like a background image in CSS. So we use the URL function and just type it, pass in the name of the image we want to use. And notice that it preserved the size. that does make a bit of a difference. So should probably make that image really small because it's just for a bulleted list. There we go. So a really small image now. So it'll probably hopefully show. There we go. So we can load in images instead of and custom shapes to mark our list.
So there would be no need to save that image as a JPEG, right? As long as we just put it as find it as PNG. So both of those are usually the types of images that we use are JPEGs and PNGs. I've never heard of the PNG.
Portable network graphics. These are very common ones because PNG files often just pronounced PNG files. Those allow for transparency.
And also the JPEGs are fixed images that you can just change the size, make it bigger and smaller. But it looks like with this, you can go in and edit it like you just did to make that.
Yeah, it's set up in layers. So on this one, not so much, but on with Microsoft Paint, not so much. But on nicer software, the colors are all separate layers. So on nicer graphic software, you can pull those layers back apart and do a lot of editing. The big thing is PNGs will have the quality of a JPEG and allow transparency. If we want to have a transparent image where we can see through parts of the background, it has to be a PNG
or that's what you mean. So to overlayer, to go over, like if, that's what you meant. But listen, when you said transparency, I was just thinking like, hey, this is what you see is what you get. Sorry.
Well, yeah, like the green screen stuff or in videos, right? We might want to draw something, but be able to see past it. We don't want our picture to be a perfect square.
So we could do, in that instance, we would use the background image and then the transparency. Okay, so the background image would be fixed and then the transparency would go on the layered image.
But that's getting into graphic stuff. As far as HTML list styled in CSS, if we have a picture, we can pass it in here. It can be a JPEG or a GIF or a PNG or any format of image that the browser will know about, we can use. What's the other thing? So we can use images or the little default shapes. And the other big one for this is the list style position. And also none is an option we can put there as well. Oops, I spelled position wrong. For the style, we can put none, but I believe your homework has had you do that on like every single assignment. So you've seen that one. We can turn those little dots off on an ordered list. Or an ordered list. We're going to look at that in a second. List style position. And our two options here are inside and outside. So that's saying, did you notice when I said inside, it moved everything over? So the indenting is still the same, but now our little markers for the bulleted list are indented. If I had go back here and put a title, we can probably see that better. Earlier when I put the title, it was lined up. The title was lined up with the words and the markers were off to the side. But now you can see that if the CSS is set to inside, those markers move over to that indenting level. Or the default is the outside, depending on how you want your list to set up. And in that case, the words line up at the indent level. So inside or outside of the indent level. The other type of list is going to be an ordered list. I'll take that off there now and just change this back to ordered list, which by default has some numbers. So we have the same, that list style type, like same one we saw to control circles or squares or whatever. We don't have images with an ordered list, which kind of makes sense because images aren't, it would be the same image every time, and that doesn't apply any sort of order. But some of the options here are like Georgian.
About the images list, what if you wanted to like if you went to a yearbook, or if you wanted to show all the faculty, or anything like that, would that not be an image list?
That would be you'd have to put that in HTML.
Okay, and then in HTML, then you do the DD and the.
You'd have like a bunch of images in a table.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we can use different things to organize it. I had this one in my notes. So the Georgian alphabet, I don't really know that language, but Southern Russia. Then we have lower alpha. That one we'll probably recognize. Obviously, there's an upper alpha, upper Roman. And we can specify each one. And then if you have like more indenting levels, we can put list inside of list. So maybe for, I'll add another list item here. And this list item will be, I'll stick in an unordered list. Which again needs list items. So I'll just put item. Put some random word there. But then that's how we take care of all that indenting that might need done on the list. We have to actually nest a list inside of a list. But again, yeah, there'll be lab time today as normal. I just wanted to kind of cover some of these main things. Yeah, so lower and uppercase alphabet, Roman, or numbers, and then we can change fonts and stuff like that. Oh, I made a note, page 651, which was probably from an old textbook. Let me grab my textbook real quick. So here's, yeah, the textbook that some of y'all have. 651. Okay, yes, on page 651 is it's Appendix D. So that's 649. But somewhere on there is all the stuff about list. Yeah, down near the bottom of the third page of Appendix D is all the options for setting up the list style. And again, you can play around with those, kind of get familiar with that, but our textbook really, really likes list. The other one I wanted to show, I'll put down here below the list, is a summary, a details tag, details and summary. The last time I checked, which wasn't very long ago, Edge does not support this. So all the other major browsers will do this, but Edge doesn't for some reason. So we set up this tag called details, which will surround the whole thing. And then inside of that, we put a tag called summary. And the summary always shows. So some sort of some sort of summary. And then we can put some other stuff here, like maybe a bunch of paragraphs. Here is some stuff. Another paragraph. More stuff down here. Just some completely random words. I might as well write that. Completely random words. Nothing too important there, but when I reload that, we see this thing. So the details tag is kind of like the arrow, and then when we click that, we either see or don't see that stuff. And the summary tag is what will always show. So it collapses back to the summary tag, and anything else we have down to the closing details tag just expands or collapses.
Wow.
The one thing you want to keep in mind is not every browser supports this still. So what I like to do is, so you might want to do some sort of formatting so that it works. I guess I could check this with Edge.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to ask. Like, so if certain browsers, because I noticed that when I go from, nothing was showing up in, let's say, Chrome or whatever, and I had to go check it in Edge. But if they didn't see that little arrow, is it customary to put some type of a title above that, or not a title, but like a section header?
We just want to format it differently. That's what
Okay.
I was gonna say. We just want to format it differently. It's part of the standard, and Edge is the only one that doesn't do it. Oh, looks like Edge does it now too, so it's not so big of a deal. They just took a long time to get going with it.
Can you change the color of that little arrow?
Not easily. We will see that week 8, like the last day or something. I'm going to show you some stuff that's not part of the standard. So with this CSS standard, no. And which means it has to be customized. So we have to change it differently for Chrome and Firefox and Edge and Safari.
Which is risky, right?
No, really. We put more rule. We write a rule for every single one.
Okay.
And then it gets ignored if it doesn't know if the browser doesn't know. So if we only write the say Firefox rules, we only write the rules for Firefox, then every other browser just ignores them. So if it's a problem, it'll get ignored. What I was going to say is, Edge was the last one that didn't support it, so all the major browsers support it now. But something to make it stand out, I would usually try to make it look like a dictionary list. So over in the CSS, do something like a paragraph, any paragraphs inside the details tag, just add a left margin of, I don't know, some sort of left margin. That way, if it...
You said we would have to write a what? Because you said if that were the case, we would have to write one specific for Firefox. You said what would that be that you would have to write?
Oh, the style rules.
The style rules. So something like that would be for subscription. So if someone didn't pay their monthly payment, then they would no longer have access to, whatever that would be with the rule.
No, it's a style rule. So they look like this. Which one do I want to use?
Literally just for CSS, what you're talking about, right? Like the only style rules across the board for the different browsers. Got it.
Yeah. So like this, it looks like that. It's just another style rule we work with that only that only certain things would know what to write. I don't think that one worked. We will see that before long. For right now, just working with all the standard stuff, there's not a good way to change that. Nobody included one. And well, all the browsers are working with it now, but it might still be a good idea in case people are, people might not update their browser. I would usually indent that or something just to make it look like a dictionary list, something to make it stand out, right? That way, if it does start that way, we can, if it doesn't work, there's still some indication that separates it from the summary. The last thing to show is notice that it starts closed. So this is an attribute we can put in. If we just type the word open, whenever we have a Boolean attribute, which this is definitely a Boolean, right? It's one or the other. It's either opened or it's closed. Whenever we have a Boolean attribute, we don't have to assign it a value. We can just say open. Some people like to, for consistency, like to have something assigned. And what's fairly standard is if it's a Boolean attribute, we just set it equal to itself. So if we want it on, if we want it to start opened, we only have to type the word open. We just have to put the name of that attribute in there. And then if that's enough to indicate that it's going to be assigned true. So what some people like consistency. So for the sake of consistency, some people will just set that equal to itself. And that will work exactly the same as just having the word there itself. But if you want it to start open, it's a Boolean attribute. So for any Boolean type attributes, like, well, two states, it's either open, it's either expanded or it's collapsed. So if we want it expanded, we put the attribute and that counts as true. And if we want it false, we leave the attribute off. And we can still change it. That doesn't lock it in place. That just defines the starting position for it. That's the basic idea in those. Just the details tag surrounds everything that can be collapsed. And a summary tag there is the part that will always show. That's what it collapses back to. And some sort of style to make it stand out in case somebody's browser doesn't support it will also help make the page look a little nicer in case it doesn't work. Anything else? Details and closes. Yeah. Any questions about that?
When you say in case it doesn't work, because I had that happen a lot, so it would go to the basic page before. Is that what you mean? Like, where it's just like we're at the very top. It was just everything was black and white. Is that what you mean? Or just in case the styles aren't like compatible with the browsers?
Oh, like if it doesn't know what this details tag is. So like the arrow here. If it,
okay.
Edge was the last one that didn't apply that. So what it would do is just show all the words.
Okay, okay.
And there was no arrow to collapse it.
Now, are those going to be tappable? Can those be tappable? Those that fall down, if they were put into a list, would you be able to make those into links?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can put whatever you want there. You can put any HTML code you want there. Actually, here, let me open one of my pages that has a lot of these.
Would you be able to put that in the header?
Actually, oh, I can't open it this way. I have to start a server. It's not on an HTML page, but well, it's HTML, but it's not an HTML file. As soon as this goes, okay.
Oh yeah, I see. Because right now you have it within the body, so you could put it in. Well, we got head.
So
I
like
don't think there
here,
is a
this
header.
has those summary detail tags, and it just has, well, it's supposed to be a table. Right now it's showing a PHP error. Oh, I guess I don't have the database anymore. But that one had tables inside of it. But apparently it can't find the database, so.
And then once we get the PHP, when we do that next semester, then that table would drop down and have the schedule where they could. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that one, where is the? If I open this code, how much can we see here? Okay, yeah. So here's the details. The summary tag, what always shows, and then inside it, the collapsible part is a PHP tag that's going to try to connect to a database and bring back a table, and just echoes HTML code back. So for some reason, the database didn't open, so it's not showing the table. But yeah, whatever we want, we can put any HTML we want inside of that tag. Where was it at? There it is. Just like any other type of nesting. Were there any other questions?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so it's 4 o'clock. As normal, our scheduled time is till 4:50. So we'll just call the rest of this lab time. And as normal, I'm going to keep my setup here and be available to jump back on in a split second up until the scheduled time. You can contact me anytime, but the next hour is when I guarantee you I can be back on Zoom in a couple seconds. I think a couple people were going to stick around anyway. But otherwise, that was it for today, unless somebody had some more questions.
Oh, I'm here.
Hey, well, I will see you all on Wednesday, and we'll go over forms, which is our input things. The text areas to type in, the color pickers, buttons to click on, and all the stuff to input data. We'll see that Wednesday. Everybody have a good evening.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to stick around. I know you want to you want to stop